Welcome to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today we are discussing a difficult reality for some law graduates. What happens if you fail the bar exam? If you've just gotten disappointing news, we have helpful tips in this podcast to help you regroup. If you are in law school right now, this podcast can offer you tips on how to make sure you are as prepared as possible for your bar exam, so hopefully this will be the only attempt that you need. Your Law School Toolbox host today is Lee Burgess. That's me. Allison Monahan and I are the hosts of this podcast. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. We're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the Catapult Conference. Allison also runs the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review on iTunes. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reach us via the contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com, and we'd love to hear from you. And with that, let's get started. Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today we are talking about a difficult reality for some folks, what happens when you don't pass the bar exam. And we're welcoming our special guest, Ariel Salzer, who is one of our most experienced California bar exams. And guys, we actually like talking about failing the bar exam. I think we might be two of the only people out there who like to talk about this.
Yeah, I think you might be right.
Yeah, I think we might be right. All right, well, let's get started because if you fail the bar, it is pretty much the best of times or the worst of times. But, a lot of people have been getting bad news. California results are usually the last ones to come out. They'll come out November 18th of this season. So what do you do, Ariel, when you get the news that your name isn't on the pass list?
I think for most people, the first impulse is to think it was a mistake. I talk to so many people, so many students that they're really convinced they're going to pass. And then when they don't, especially since it's kind of ambiguous in California, it says that your number does not appear on the list. It's sort of vague, right? You're wondering if maybe they made a mistake.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably the first thing people do.
Then you get the letter.
Then
it's very
a couple
clear
days
that it
later,
wasn't a mistake.
Right. So you have this 2-day window of maybe, and then you get the for sure no. And I think for a lot of people, their world comes crashing down to a certain extent. These people are not used to failing exams of any kind.
Right. I mean, that's the reality, right? You go to law school usually because you're a pretty good student, and then you fight your way through law school, and hopefully you've done pretty well. And, I think there's an assumption that people who are not academically successful in law school are the only people that fail the bar. That is absolutely not true.
Sure.
Absolutely not true.
And I was looking it up this morning, actually, thinking about this podcast. And I think they were saying Michelle Obama, Hillary Clinton, Cardozo, Judge Cardozo, John F. Kennedy, all these people have failed the bar in whatever jurisdiction. So, it's not just the bottom of the class.
Right. Exactly. And I think that, it's important to remember that you're in good company if this is your reality. And there are plenty of things that you can do to make sure this doesn't stay your reality. But the first thing you have to do is, be kind to yourself and remember this isn't the end of the world. This is just an unfortunate bump in the road in your path to your law career.
Yeah, and it's not like the people passing are getting 100% and you got 1%. It's sometimes a matter of 4 points, 1 point even. I've seen scores that are literally a couple of points away.
Yeah, I've recently talked to a couple of people who missed the New York bar by just 2 points.
So
and
frustrating.
It's so frustrating because you're so close, but then you look at your scores and you're like, well, I could have made it up so many different places, and then you have to figure out how the hell are you going to make up those,
Sure.
a couple points so you're not in that danger zone anymore.
Yeah, definitely. And, for these guys who are getting the bad news right before Thanksgiving, usually, it's awful. It feels terrible. And I think it's important to just kind of sit with that a little bit, and let yourself feel bad because it's a bad feeling.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And I think it's also important to remember that nobody is really going to feel your pain like you do at this point.
Sure. And, while it might be tempting to think like, oh, my whole class is looking me up and wondering why I didn't pass or why I'm not calling or whatever. Everybody who takes this exam has thought about what if I don't pass?
Oh, yeah.
And they know that that's an awful feeling and they're not going to hold it over you. Your enemies are not waiting, checking the results. And everybody knows that it's terrible and it feels bad. And the good news is everybody forgets really soon. You care about it a lot, but it's water under the bridge at a certain point.
Yeah. let's be honest. We were just looking at my law school graduation pictures before we were doing this podcast, and that seems like a really long time ago. And I really can't tell you who in my class did not pass the bar. I mean, it is just not information you retain in your brain.
No. And even, people who have failed and felt terrible and gone on to pass, they don't even remember how painful it was most of the time. You forget, like any pain in life, right?
Like childbirth.
Sure, let's go with that. You live on, you forget, and nobody's going to care about it as much as you do in this moment. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
I think, though, it's important that you do give yourself time to grieve, though, because I think a lot of people don't want to deal with the emotions. They just want to start studying again or start coming up with a plan, which is critically important, and we're going to talk about that. Don't worry. But I think there is something about, doing whatever you need to do to like sit with this and move past it. Because if you don't process these feelings, they're going to come back, and they're probably going to come back like the week before the exam.
With a vengeance.
They
come back. They rear their ugly head at the worst moment when you're stressed out. I think, too, that whole idea of, maybe it was a mistake. Maybe I was close and I just got a mean grade, or maybe it's someone else's fault. I think people really need to come to terms with the idea that, no, your numbers were lower for a reason. You have to figure out that reason.
Yeah.
So I think maybe the first step, even as you're sitting there dealing with that grief, maybe the next step after the grief is, why did this happen? And how was it my fault? And how can I fix it? Mm-hmm. And of course, we'll get to that. But really kind of staring it in the face and figuring out, why did this happen?
Yeah, it's a very vulnerable place. I mean, like, you have to do some serious self-reflection. You have to, one of the things we've talked about a lot in our podcast is the growth mindset, versus deciding you're a failure because of, these results, but instead saying like, okay, well, I just failed. Mm-hmm. Now it's about, what can I learn from this? And getting to that place where you can have that growth mindset, I think, is the only way that you can start to prepare again from a positive place. You just stay in the this was somebody else's mistake. I mean, and crazy stuff happens. Like, there was an earthquake or your computer crashed or sure, those may have been factors, but the reality is you maybe still could have even done better, been better prepared, been better at the writing portion, done more MBE prep. I mean, I think all of us can think about things. Even I would definitely think about things I would have done differently if I retook the bar. I'm not planning on it just for fun or anything, but to change what you did to be better prepared. It's just important that you don't just blame the situation. You have to look at yourself and say, okay, well, now that I've grieved, now what can I do? What can I learn? Because I think anytime you can learn from the previous experience. Unless you get 100% on the bar, which
they don't tell you, even if you do.
Yeah, which they don't tell you.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think there's no way you're going to fix a problem if you don't understand in detail what that problem was and how it happened. Yeah. There's no way to move forward. So, I mean, I do agree. That's a huge first step. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, exactly. Now, so you come up with your best guess for why this happened. And I think there's actually a lot of wisdom that people have when they just sit down and start to reflect. I mean, I talk to so many bar takers all over the country. And when I ask them what they went wrong, they have a lot of wisdom when you really start to be honest with yourself about what happened.
And, it's kind of funny because I know you deal with people kind of early on in the process, and then once we're getting into tutoring,
and then I hand them off.
You hand them to me, and once we're into tutoring, a lot of times I think they lose sight of that kind of gut instinct of why they failed. And so people will say things to me like, oh, well, I just need to do 200 MBEs a day and I'll be fine. It's like, no, really? I mean, why don't we think about why you may have failed for other reasons too? Like, what was your personal situation in your life? Right. Did you have enough free time to actually study in the way you needed to? Right. Did it actually come down to MBEs, or was it really the essays that were sort of terrible? Let's look at those.
And haven't we at time recommended people even writing a letter to themselves?
Yeah.
In the early days that they can reference later on in the process?
And I had a student do this. It wasn't a letter per se, but it was kind of notes to themselves about, this is how I do my best. These, these situations are where I study the most effectively, when I'm at home versus the library or whatever, vice versa. When I'm, running on 9 hours of sleep instead of 5, and I think keeping these things in mind as you go through the process of studying, which is going to get really stressful, it can help you kind of remember, like, back to the basics. How do you do the best, or why did you fail, for these particular reasons?
Yeah, I think it can be really powerful to write this stuff down. And you may feel like it's a little woohoo or whatever. But I've also had students over the years do journal entries at night where we recommend, you write down, what did you do well today? What was successful? What could you have done better on? And then maybe, any other notes to yourself. And that's another way that you can kind of check in with yourself. But I like the idea of like setting goals in the beginning, kind of almost making a mission statement for how your bar prep's going to go. This is what I'm committing to the process. So you can kind of hold yourself accountable because it does get gnarly.
Yeah.
Like the stress does like really bubble up.
For sure.
Yeah.
And, bullet point journaling even. It doesn't have to be paragraphs. I know at the end of the day, a paragraph is the last thing you want to write, especially after doing essays and performance tests. But just keeping yourself accountable too, and making sure, it's amazing how many times students tell me things like, well, that PT was really hard because I was at Starbucks and it was really distracting. And it's sort of like, why were you at Starbucks doing a PT? It's really loud there. Yeah. There's people interrupting you. Like, what are you? No, you know in the back of your mind that this is not conducive to your work.
Yeah.
So I think people lose sight of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. It's really easy to start doing self-sabotaging behavior really quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's important to hold yourself accountable, make sure family and friends, or if you're working with a tutor or somebody is helping you hold yourself accountable. Because a PT or an MPT at a Starbucks on your computer, you don't even print it out. You do it for an hour and then you go up and get a coffee and then you come back and you can't remember what you read. Like, then you can't figure out why you didn't do well. That's not productive.
Sure. And the idea of sabotage is so interesting too, I think, because in some people's minds, I think it's a lot easier to fail and feel like, well, I didn't give it my all.
Right.
And I failed. And maybe that's okay because I wasn't trying my hardest, which means it's not an accurate reflection of my ability. But a student was telling me the last bar season, actually, she was saying, what if I try my hardest and I still fail?
Yeah.
It's like, well, that's a reality that might happen. But if you don't try your hardest, you're almost certainly going to fail. Yeah. So what are you going to...
It's a big vulnerable space to be. Like,
absolutely.
you really have to throw yourself out there. And go all in, Sure. If you don't go all in, you're only going to be more sure you're not going to get the results that you want.
Yeah, and you're only shortchanging yourself because like we were saying at the beginning, at the end of the day, no one cares about this like you do. No one's going to think, oh, well, you didn't really try that hard and you failed. No problem. You're still smart. No one's having these thoughts. No one cares.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I think a lot of people are anxious just about how to tell people.
Definitely.
If you're working, you have to tell your boss.
That's a big one.
If you've got to tell family and friends.
Well, and especially, I mean, in a way, it's pretty cruel that the release, at least in California, the results right before Thanksgiving.
Oh, so brutal.
In some ways, I think it's sort of like, okay, this person will have their family around them, hopefully. But in other ways, it's sort of like, oh, great, my Aunt Mildred, who's been asking me every day, did you pass? And then all of a sudden, you have to tell them you failed, or whoever it is in your life. Yeah. I don't know. Nobody has an Aunt Mildred anymore, but you know what I mean.
I had a grandmother Mildred, so
there we go. But it's tough, and it's not the dinner conversation you want to be having with your relatives and people who think of you as maybe the smart one or the law school kid in the family or whatever.
Right.
It can be a crashing blow for sure.
Yeah. So you want to definitely have a plan, I think for family and friends. This can be a nice place where email can be really productive, composing an email where you kind of explain what happened. Maybe you explain that you're going to take it again, that you're getting ready to study, that this is what happened, but you're looking forward to spending, the holidays celebrating other things, whatever it might be, because then you don't have to have some of those dynamic conversations where people say insensitive things when they don't intend to.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or maybe, get a brother or sister or mom or dad to kind of brief the family and, sort of say something like, okay, well, as everyone knows, little Johnny didn't pass. So we're not going to be talking about it over turkey. Thanks.
Yeah,
or something.
Exactly.
That could help.
That's very true. And then bosses. Bosses are tough ones because some people, it's a harsh reality, do lose their jobs over this stuff.
Yeah, definitely. I was reading a story online actually about a guy who failed the bar twice and his big firm law job kept the job for him miraculously, but then he decided to take a 2-week vacation and they fired him. So, you have to use judgment for sure. But, that was a lucky situation. Most jobs, especially if you're failing twice, but a lot of times they'll say, the bargain was that you pass and come work for us at X date or whatever.
I even think that private firms, I've heard that most of them will at least give you a chance to take the second one. But government jobs oftentimes don't have the bandwidth, because if you can't appear in court, you really can't do the job function. So the people I know that actually lost their jobs were lined up for PD jobs or DA jobs.
That makes sense.
Because, they can't hold a spot. In a big firm, there's plenty of work you can do.
Sure.
Not being licensed, because you can just do work. You're doing work for other people.
You're a cog in the wheel.
Exactly.
No matter what.
Your name isn't on anything anyway.
Right.
But I think, but in a DA's office,
you're out there.
You're out there. Yeah. They really don't have a lot of value for you if you can't go fill that role.
Sure. Yeah, that's definitely something. It's definitely something to think about. So yeah, who is this boss that you're working with? Mm-hmm. How do you best present the information to them? I would probably do it in person. I don't know. I guess it depends on that relationship and how well you know them, and whether you're working every day, whether you're seeing this person.
Them, but I think you definitely want to not wait. Depending on the jurisdiction, sometimes the lists are public, sometimes they're not. So if they're not public, you have a responsibility to tell your boss, what's happened. Like, I don't think if you get your results on Friday night that you have to call them at 10 o'clock at night.
And let's just not do that anyway. This is tantamount to drunk dialing at a certain point, right? Like, you don't want to spill your guts on the phone.
Like, I would say maybe if it's a boss that you would talk to over the weekend, like an email or a phone call or an email saying, I'd like to meet with you first thing on Monday, but this is the reality. They're wondering, they might reach out to you. You need to be ready to talk to them about that.
Yeah, and don't let them hear it from somebody else.
No, and to be honest, if results come out and they're not public and your boss doesn't hear from you, they're going to figure out why they didn't hear from you.
And it kind of looks bad.
Yeah, it also kind of
Let's be frank.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so once you've gone through the suffering of having to tell family, friends, and bosses, then it really comes the decision point. Are you going to get ready to take the next exam? And our rule of thumb is yes.
Right.
Unless, because we're lawyers, it depends.
There's always
an
unless.
A but or an unless there are some special situations. So special situations that I've seen are you're not in a financial situation to set yourself up for getting help or taking time off to study, or
get a babysitter.
Getting a babysitter is a big one if you have children, or you're dealing with a family situation where you're doing, I've also had students who are primary caregivers for elderly family members. Things happen, not a good time to study. Another situation is if you have not gotten accommodations and you need them. I don't necessarily think sitting for the exam without accommodations, if the accommodations are standing in the way of you performing your best, may not make sense. It may make sense to, do what you need to do to get the accommodations, and then, sit when you have a higher likelihood of success.
Yeah, and with accommodations, I think it can be hard too, because it takes a while for them to be processed. And the whole time you're sort of wondering, am I studying the right way?
Yeah.
The way that uses the accommodations or the way that doesn't, because it can be really different.
Yeah.
If you're getting extra time or food or whatever it is during the test, you want to make sure you're studying the way that you're actually going to be able to take the test. So.
Yeah, we have a great podcast on accommodations that we will link to in the show notes. But, if right now you are listening to this, and if you're a 3L and you're thinking like, oh my gosh, I might someday fail the bar, what I want you to hear is if you are in the class of, candidates that needs accommodations, please call the bar today, the day that you listen to this podcast, find out what is required and file that paperwork on the first available day. Because the ambiguity around what kind of accommodations you might get, especially later in the bar process, is just stress that is absolutely unnecessary. It's just important to move on that information as fast as possible. And there are phone numbers for the bar. You can actually call humans and a human will tell you what the process is. You just have to do it.
Definitely.
Yeah. All right. Then it's also time to figure out what went wrong by, how you prepared. And it's not just about the academic situations of was your bar prep working for you or not. But, the other things we mentioned, were you sleeping?
Were you drinking so much Red Bull that you made yourself throw up every day? This is a real example from a real person that we've known. So there are things you can do to sabotage yourself just in terms of lifestyle too.
Not having a stable living environment.
Yeah. Not being able to pay your rent. So you're worried. It's a harsh reality, and failing the bar is expensive, but you have to figure that stuff out beforehand, not while you're studying.
Yeah, I think, and that's where I've seen delaying the exam actually work really well. I knew a student years ago who, she didn't pass once, and she just knew like she didn't have the situation where she could take the next one. So she was bartending. She just said, I'm just not going to study. I'm just going to bartend. I'm going to save money. And then I'm going to bartend up to this point. And then I can afford to get a tutor. And then I can study. And then I can take time off. And she passed. And I actually really respected that. It wasn't like she was trying not to take the exam or like skirting around, like saying, oh, I'll just take a break. She was basically like, it's not like, I'm not setting up myself up for success. I need to set myself up for success. This is what I need to do. It's worth it for me to wait, the extra 6 months or whatever. And I think for her, it was absolutely the right thing to do.
Yeah, definitely. Or people who, maybe last time when they studied, they just couldn't get any time off of work. Mm-hmm. And now it's looking like they're also not going to get any time off of work. Mm-hmm. And they're at the kind of job where their work basically owns their life. I mean, that's probably not setting yourself up for success either.
Also planning your wedding while studying for the bar. That's one we hear a lot too.
Very bad idea.
That can not lead to not fantastic results.
Or, in terms of wedding planning, realizing you'd like to be a wedding planner and you don't want to be a lawyer. Maybe don't take the exam. I mean, there are reasons not to take the test too.
Yeah.
And these are coming from real people. Again, these are real examples.
Yeah, exactly. So as much as you need to think about, exactly how you memorize stuff, did you do enough MBEs, things like that, you've also got to look at your life. Were you so stressed you were having, chronic health problems, migraines, panic attacks? I mean, literally this stuff happens. If you're listening to this and going like, I must be the only person. No, trust me, a huge portion of the bar population is struggling with, finding this balance. And it's something you really need to think about before you come back to study again.
You know what? It's interesting, though. I think what I see even more often than people's life situations getting in the way is people just not coming to terms with the fact that they failed and figuring out why. Mm-hmm. Because I think you can set yourself up in terms of life situations as much as you want. But if you can't face the music in terms of like, this is, I'm just terrible at writing essays. Mm-hmm. I can't write a PT in 3 hours. It's not gonna work well for you.
Yeah.
To just keep going down that same road that you've been down.
Yeah, and I think that's a really great point that we should talk about is coming back and developing a plan to study again. Typically doing the exact same thing you did last time does not lead to different results.
I think it was Einstein that said that. So let's go with that being
we'll go with that one.
Being a good idea. And the same thing with, you're going to get your test booklets back and you're going to have to really face those and see why they didn't stack up well against what everyone else wrote. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people don't do that. A lot of people don't even read them.
And that some jurisdictions you have to pay money to get those back. I know. It's like 50 years, like just to like turn just the knife a little bit. Worse. I know. Just to say like, oh, and you have to pay us money to get those booklets back. Or you have to go pick them up at a certain time. I mean, I've heard all of these crazy things. And people just want it out of sight, out of mind. But there is such an important point of getting those booklets back and figuring out what happened, because your recollections of what you did on that test can be completely different. I mean, I've had students say, I have no idea why I failed this question because I had so many issues. Like there was no way I could have missed any issues. And then you go through it and I'm like, well, you missed like 6. And then they're like, oh, like, I mean, it's a long time between taking the exam and studying again. And so
sure. And we want to build ourselves up. We want to tell ourselves it had to have been some kind of error or mistake, or maybe it just wasn't as good as it needed to be in some weird sort of minutia type of way. No, a lot of times though, I think students say this quite frequently to me, at least. My essays were so bad. I had no idea how bad they were. They were just run-on sentences. I talked about stuff that didn't even fit with the question, and they realize that after reading their test booklets. But if they never read them, a lot of times they just keep repeating the same mistakes.
Yeah, which is pretty amazing. So get those test booklets, however you need to get them, and sit down with them, maybe pour a glass of wine, because I think it can be easier with a little liquid courage to make yourself go through them, but you can learn a lot from them. And I think, sometimes you can get them back early in the process. For instance, in California, you have to get them much later when you're already midway through studying again. But it's all part of this evaluation of, what happened and what can you do differently. We said don't do the same thing again. If your commercial bar program didn't help you get where you needed to be, I would probably recommend that you utilize all of their resources again if they give them to you for free because you paid for them. But doing their program again is probably not going to get you a different result. We see this over and over and over again. And that's because if you went through a commercial bar prep program and your writing scores weren't passing, you need to figure out why they weren't passing. Was it because you didn't know enough law? Typically, be honest, guys, not the problem. Could be that you weren't identifying all of the issues. Much more popular problem. You weren't doing all the legal analysis necessary. Also a popular problem. You weren't managing your time well. A super popular problem. Especially on the MEEs, which are just 30 minutes. You have no wiggle room to talk about stuff that's not relevant because you literally have no time. And so it's incredibly important for you to think about how you're going to work on those skills. And that's really where I think that like a bar tutor or some sort of alternative, very targeted program can help you solve those problems, because those typically aren't the problems that are really, deeply dealt with in the commercial bar programs, because they're just focused on disseminating a huge amount of law for you to learn.
Sure, and giving you a numerical score. If you already know you're failing essays because you just failed the bar,
right.
Getting, a 50 on an essay doesn't tell you much, you know? So if that's the kind of program you're working with, you might need more specific information.
Yeah, exactly. And so you just really evaluate if you need additional help. There are definitely plenty of other resources out there. You should learn about them, talk to people, try things out, look at samples of different products and things like that, because you want to, evaluate if some other tool can really help make a difference. All right. So another thing that we like to talk about with our students is it's important, especially, if you're going back through your exams or you're just thinking about the past exams, is you've got to think about what the graders are actually looking for. I realize that most people don't talk to bar graders on a regular basis.
But we do. And we were just talking to bar graders last week.
Exactly. And, it is fascinating when you as a student start to put yourself in the position of a bar grader. If you're a law student, I think we've talked about how important it is to put yourself in the position of your law professors as well, because if you've never graded a stack of papers before and really felt like what it feels like to read like a bad answer after bad answer after bad answer, it's very sobering. And I think you have to realize that bar graders read stacks and stacks and stacks of essays. And if you make their bar grading job difficult, your scores are likely going to reflect that.
And these are nights and weekends. These people have jobs. I mean, they're already, what the grader we were talking to just last week was saying, when I open a booklet and I see a huge page of text with no breaks and no headers, I'm already thinking, oh, great.
Oh, yeah.
There goes my time.
Mm-hmm. It's true. I mean, I've had other graders tell me they open a booklet and like everybody's like kind of a high fail, low pass. Like when they open it up, that's kind of where they start. And they either feel more positive and the score goes up, or they get frustrated and the score quickly goes down. I mean, they don't take a lot of time to do this. It's not like, even your law professors weren't taking a ton of time to read your exams, but they were probably going through it with much more of a fine-tooth comb than graders who have to move through these exam questions incredibly quickly. Thousands and thousands of people in many of these jurisdictions take the exam. And you've got to basically say, okay, I want to be one in the pile of many that they open up and go, oh, that is so lovely. Check, 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 pass. And then just like move you on. You don't want them to stop and say, oh my God, no paragraph breaks. Oh my gosh, no analysis.
Where is the fourth element of negligence?
Right.
I don't see anything.
Exactly. Or like they didn't number all the parts to the question. Now I have to go look to see if they answered all the parts of the question. No headers. Rampant typos. I mean, we're not talking about like, needing to do spell check, but incoherent writing is not also going to, make your exam very easy to read. So it's really important to start thinking about how this test is graded, how the test works, especially for the writing portion. Let's think about the performance test, whether it be a 3-hour performance test or like a 90-minute MPT, like it's closed universe. Like you don't have to know anything else. So you can't get the law wrong. It's like in front of you, and you have to follow the directions because that's like what they're grading you on is basically if you can follow the directions.
A lot of people don't follow the directions.
I will never forget when I first started bar tutoring, I had a student bring me a performance test and she had done a statement of facts and the directions told you explicitly not to write a statement of facts. And I asked her, why would you write a statement of facts?
Why would you do
that? And she goes, well, because I usually did. And I thought, I'm sure they would give me points for it. And I'm like, not if they told you not to.
Yeah, they're grading you on, did you do what I say?
Right.
It's basically, did you do what I say in the exact words that I said it?
Right.
Yeah, or people just try to sound really bombastic about things. And I know bombastic is sort of a bombastic word to be using to describe that. But I mean, they try to sound smart. You know, they put in all these fancy prose. No, short, concise sentences that make sense when you're reading fast. That's what you're going for.
Yeah, a really great exercise that you can do with some of your friends if you're studying for the bar for the first time or even a repeat taker, that I used to do in one of my bar classes is we would hand, you bring one of your essays and you hand it to the person next to you. And you give them just a couple minutes to read it. And then they hand it to the next person and the next person. And everybody has to give it a score once you understand how the exam is graded. And if you don't understand how the exam is graded, learn about that.
Read our blog.
So, but you will be shocked at what people are able to see when they skim those answers. You can do it to your own answers. I mean, I've had my own tutoring students where I'm like, did you read this answer? In California, they spend 2 to 3 minutes on an essay. I'll be like, did you set your phone for 2 minutes and read your answer to see how much you can get through?
Could you find the issues?
Could you find the issues? Could you see that you answered all 4 parts of the question? And it's such a simple little thing, but it really can make a huge difference. You have to, again, this all goes back to being very honest with yourself, being very vulnerable. If you're doing a bad job, that's fine. Let's own it and fix it. This stuff isn't rocket science. So we're not saying that passing the bar is easy. Passing the bar is very challenging. It's probably one of the more difficult academic things that most of us will have gone through. But they're not hiding the ball. They do want a good chunk of the people in the room to all get the same answer so they can pass.
And there's no special points for, oh, wow, this person, I know I said don't write a statement of facts, but this person did, and that shows initiative. I mean, they don't do that.
No,
they're not trying to trick you.
They don't want you to be original. Originality is not rewarded.
Blend in.
I've also had students who, there's a crim law question, and they, on something they wrote a really complicated motion on at their externship, and they don't understand why they didn't get a high score on that. And it's because you didn't answer the question.
You wrote about the motion.
You wrote about the motion that you wrote at work, which is great, but that's not what the graders have a key that they're grading against.
And it's funny, actually, a lot of times, and I think this has happened to you too, Lee, but students will tell me, I was so surprised my very highest score was on my worst subject.
Oh, yeah, all the time.
And it's okay, well, that's because you forced yourself to be really plain and clear and simple and organized because you didn't know the law very well.
Yeah.
And that happens a lot of the time.
Yeah, I was actually talking to one of our other bar tutors for the UBE yesterday, and we were talking about the importance of this idea of precision with the bar. That I think is something that on one hand, we like to say minimum competency because you don't have to be perfect. But what you do know, you have to be precise. Rule statements need to include the terms of art. They don't have to be long. You don't have to give me the history of the Constitution.
Please don't, in fact.
Please don't. But if you are saying, that there's a warrant requirement and the warrant requirement exception is if, yada, 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 blah, 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 then it's okay, well, that you still have to be precise, right? You have to use, if it's in plain view, that needs to have the words plain view. You can't say because the officer could see in the car. The grader isn't really psyched to figure out if that means plain view.
Yeah, you need to tell them.
You need to say plain view. And so there is an element of precision, both with the law, which doesn't mean you need to learn more of it or study more of it. That actually means you need to study less words, but just have them be the right words and write them the same way over and over and over again. And then you also need to be precise with your issues, like we were talking about. You write about the Fourth Amendment that you wrote on this motion, but it doesn't answer the question. You're not being precise. You can't pass. You need to answer the question asked. You need to raise the issues raised by the facts. You need to discuss the facts discussed in the fact pattern. I always enjoy reading, I use air quotes on the podcast, reading a student answer that's making up facts.
Sure.
Or changing facts.
I saw that the other day.
Yeah.
Oh, the man was punched in the face and hit his head. No, he wasn't. he was struck with a fist. He was not punched in the face.
Yeah.
It's different.
It is different, or hitting your head on the concrete versus, hitting your head on a pillow. Those are very different things.
It changes the whole story.
It changes the whole story. And so you have to be very precise. So I think it can be so overwhelming with the amount of law that you have to learn, the amount of questions you have to do. But precision is so important. And I think, in practice, remembering that when you're studying, but also with the multiple choice, precision is very important. They're typically testing narrow rules, and you have to be very specific. You have to read the language very carefully. You have to read those answer choices very carefully, because they can be changing words in the answer choices to make some of them wrong. And so you just have to, not be super anal retentive, but you do have to, be very precise, focus on what you're doing, and realize that the bar is hard enough without them making it overly complicated. The law is hard enough. Yeah, the law is hard enough. The time constraints are hard enough. Sitting down for the multiple choice and taking 6 hours of multiple choice in a day is hard enough. They don't have to make it any trickier than the law allows it to be.
Yeah, definitely. And how do you get to precision? I mean, is it sitting in the corner reading a bunch of esoteric stuff about burglary? No. Is it reading why we have burglary rules and what all of the different combinations of whatever it is might be? No, you have to find something precise and you have to memorize it in a precise way, and then you have to use it with precision.
Right.
And that's where I think a lot of people go wrong, is they think familiarity is good. Mm-hmm. Familiarity will get me through. And a lot of times it's not good enough.
No.
You do need those buzzwords.
You do. And I think that's where it gets a little murky in the bar world, because many bar prep programs encourage you to learn the law by listening to hours and hours and hours and hours, and then some more hours of lectures, which is great if you're an auditory learner and you can retain information that it's done in those lectures. But for most of us, you can listen to 3 hours of lectures, and if you ask me what the rule for standing is, if I didn't know it already, I would probably say, I don't remember, because I just listened to 3 hours of constitutional law being,
Yeah, the concept would sound familiar,
right.
But that's not enough.
And so, especially if you're coming back after a failure, it's really important to think about what worked as far as learning the law and what didn't. And we oftentimes talk about many bar providers giving you law in the way of drinking from a fire hose. You are supposed to just take all of this information and figure out how to make sense of it. So we like to say to flip it on its head and try and maybe say that this next time you're going to come at it is to start from a very simplistic place, let's say a minimum competency knowledge of the law place, and then add knowledge through practice and through studying. I want you to know all the basic rules for constitutional law before you knew the nuances about executive orders and this or that.
I was just going to say executive orders. No, you need to know the Commerce Clause.
Right.
You need to know equal protection, due process. Learn that stuff before executive power.
Exactly.
It's all important, but some of it's more important.
Yeah, exactly. The stuff. And through practice, why practice is such a big part of studying anytime you study for the bar, but especially studying again, is the practice questions are going to pull these nuances out for you. I mean, that's the beauty. You do banks of MBE questions, you're going to see a lot of nuances, and you're going to start to see the same ones, character evidence over and over and over again. Because
all those hearsay exceptions.
Yeah, all those hearsay exceptions and the nuances around those hearsay exceptions. That's why you do the practice, so you can actually learn from them.
Definitely.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we might be out of time. Although we could talk about the bar exam forever.
And we'd love to.
But you probably either are feeling really good or feeling really stressed, and so we'll just stop it right there. If you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and ratings on iTunes. We'd really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Allison at lee@lawschooltoolbox.com or allison@lawschooltoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website form at lawschooltoolbox.com. Remember to check out our sister site, barexamtoolbox.com, and we'll link to some helpful bar-related posts in the show notes. Thanks for listening. Good luck with your bar prep, and we'll talk soon.